Today is Saturday, December 7th. One of the biggest joys, but also one of the major stressors of this holiday season is cooking. So today we're talking to two people who can help you feel more confident in the kitchen without putting too much pressure on yourself to make everything perfect. Listen, I'm still an amateur in the kitchen, but honestly, thanks to our two guests today, I've continued to improve and actually really enjoy the process now, which is exactly why I invited both of them onto this show. Our first guest is my friend, Bri McKoy. She's a full-time food blogger and author of The Cook's Book, who helps people navigate basic kitchen techniques as they learn to become home chefs. Bri talks about her journey from takeout junkie to cooking meals from scratch. She shares some of the biggest mistakes new cooks make and the most important techniques everyone should know. Then, if you're a busy parent who's thinking less about kitchen technique and more about just getting your family fed, definitely listen to the second half of this episode. Our second guest is my personal go-to person for recipes that are actually doable yet still delicious, even on busy weeknights with kids running around. Amy Palanjian runs the Yummy Toddler Food blog and is the author of Dinnertime SOS. She creates kid-friendly recipes and offers advice for parents who want to cook but may not always have time or energy to make complex meals from scratch. She's giving great tips for how to approach cooking and baking for families. And each guest brought us a fantastic yet simple holiday recipe to try. So let's get started. First up, Bri McKoy, author of The Cook's Book. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Bri McKoy, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I love the Newsworthy.
I love to know that you're actually a listener.
I really am, every morning.
Well, I love your cookbook, and so I want to talk about that today. You went from not knowing much about how to cook at all to really making it your career. So why did you want to make that leap?
Well, I never loved cooking. I didn't want to be in the kitchen at all. And then I am a military spouse. And so we move every 2 to 3 years. And the first few years, it was really hard for us to find community. And I was like, I need friends. What is the fastest way to friendship? And we started having people over for meals. And this was when I was still learning to cook. So I was still serving dried out chicken, burnt chicken. So the food was actually not good because I was still learning to cook, but we were instantly getting community. And I realized, oh my gosh, I do want to learn how to cook a little better so that I'm not so frazzled by the act of cooking so that I can bring more people to my table. I cooked my way through one cookbook and I just fell in love with it and decided to start a blog to share all the mistakes that I was making in hopes of teaching people don't do this, don't make this mistake. And then it turned into a career.
So what's one of the biggest mistakes that people make, or one that really stands out to you when you were learning?
I would say salt. There are so many different varieties of salt, and I didn't realize that. And so when a recipe would say, add a tablespoon of kosher salt, I would just use table salt because I didn't know there was a difference between kosher salt and table salt. And then my dish would be so salty, and it basically was ruined. And I realized, okay, next time I'm making a recipe, I'm just going to back off on the salt because I can always add more salt at the end. And that became a really big teacher to me. I realized that I can always add something into my dish. I can't as easily subtract from my dish.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And so someone who feels intimidated, what is your advice for that person to even just get started?
I would say start so simple. I feel like when I started to learn to cook, I wanted to make these really grand dishes. I don't know why that was out the gate, I'm going to make a beef Wellington when I've literally never even fried a chicken. And so I did get a cookbook where it had a bunch of simple meals, and I just needed to get these simple meals under my belt so I felt confident, because once I started to feel confident, then I wanted to take on more challenges in the kitchen.
Okay, so what if there's somebody saying, okay, I've got the basics down, how do I take it to the next level?
So I actually, in my cookbook, the Cook's Book, I talk about how if you have your basics, if you have your foundation, you should be able to go and look up a recipe. And just by looking at the ingredients alone or the technique alone, you should be able to say, like, I feel comfortable with this. I feel comfortable with braising now. I feel comfortable with deglazing. And so whenever you see some of those terms or those keywords in your ingredient instructions, just dive in and go for it.
And you go through each one of those things in your book, right? So if somebody doesn't know those things yet, they can get your cookbook and learn.
The way that I wrote my cookbook is we make a recipe after I have taught important kitchen technique. So I teach a kitchen technique and then we make a recipe based off that kitchen technique. And then all the recipes build on those kitchen techniques. So as you go through the Cook's Book, the recipes get a little bit more complex as they're bringing in all of the kitchen techniques. So by the time you get to the end of the Cook's Book, we have made, a whole roasted chicken. We've made stewed beef. We've made a ton of dishes that maybe in the beginning of the book, you thought I would never do that.
So give us a few of the best basics to know in the kitchen. What are a few of the things that people need to know first?
3 things that I think are really important. The first is salt, as we already talked about. If you know what kind of salt you are working with, then you really already have a leg up in the kitchen because every recipe uses salt. And so you just need to know, am I using a salt that's more salty? Am I using a salt that's more pure? And salt is also what brings flavor to dishes. I always say that salt is what puts a spotlight on an ingredient. It makes a potato more potatoey. It makes a tomato more tomatoey. It just spotlights that dish. And then the second thing are knives, sharp knives. I used to never want to use a sharp knife because I didn't feel confident in the kitchen. So I thought, I'm going to cut my fingers off. And that's not a great way to learn confidence in the kitchen. But sharp knives are actually very safe. And you need to sharpen your knives at least twice a year. Almost every local kitchen shop will sharpen your knife for a few dollars. And then the third technique that really helped me in the kitchen was knowing how to heat my pan properly so that food would not stick. And I talk about that in the book of if your food is sticking, it's probably because your pan was too cold when you added the food or too hot. And so there's a way to learn how your pan, specifically with your stove, needs to heat up so that you can add food so it essentially becomes a nonstick pan.
And going back to number 2 really quick, I know you have kind of an interesting, fun way to test if your knives are sharp enough.
So what you want to do is grab a piece of paper and you can just have someone hold that piece of paper and take your knife and run your knife down through the paper. And if it snags as it's going down or kind of gives a jagged line, then you definitely need to get your knife sharpened. But if it cuts through that piece of paper in one straight line like butter, you're good to go.
Any other must-know hacks?
Another one that I really love is deglazing. That is the secret that restaurants use to get flavor into dishes. And you can deglaze anything. And you can do it with any kind of liquid. I usually am using either a stock or a wine if I have it on hand. But basically deglazing is when you're cooking your dish in your pan and you see those brown stuck on bits, then you can get those up off the pan and that adds so much flavor and richness to your dish. So you just will very gently pour in your liquid and scrape up the brown bits as you go. Make sure your heat is on high or medium high because you need that to interact with the liquid. And then your dish will be so flavorful. It's insane.
So don't get rid of the little brown bits.
Right. The little brown bits, I think when I first started learning to cook, I was like, I have burnt something. And then I realized, no, that is so much flavor. Now, if it's black, we have gone into the burning territory. But brown, golden brown, deep brown, that is flavor. You do not want to get rid of that. And that's also how people always ask me, how do you keep your pans so clean? And it's because I deglaze.
So let's talk a little bit more about the holidays because that is on people's minds. It's now December. What's your main strategy when it comes to figuring out what to make for the holidays, whether, maybe you're going to make a dish or two or you're hosting the whole thing?
If I am hosting the whole thing, the first thing that I do is I decide what I want to cook, what I love to cook, because that's another mistake I used to make. I used to be like, well, I'm hosting, so I have to make the turkey. And so I really had to let go of that control and just say, these are the things that I want to cook, and these are the things that I love to cook. And that is how I'm going to proceed. And then I know someone who loves cooking the turkey or whatever it is. And I would just ask people to do the things that I know that they love, that I do not love. I think another thing that I always kind of got hung up on is tradition, like, oh, you have to have a ham at Christmas or you have to have a turkey at Thanksgiving. And I realized, why don't you make what you love? So I think if you lean into what you love or what you know you feel comfortable cooking, it takes so much stress out of that equation.
Okay, so walk us through a simple dish that you love to make for the holidays, and we'll link to it on our website so people can check out the full recipe, but give us an idea of one of your favorite holiday dishes.
I would say my favorite and go-to and simplest is my baked fontina. It is so easy to prep ahead of time. Think of it kind of like a fondue. You just take a cast iron skillet, you cube up some fontina cheese, and then you put fresh herbs on it like thyme and rosemary, a little bit of chopped garlic, salt and pepper, and some olive oil. And then you can just put that in the refrigerator until guests start coming over. So that can be the night before, the morning before. And then as guests come over, you put it in the broiler for just about like 8 to 10 minutes and it becomes all bubbly and melty. And then your house smells insane. And then you serve it with, carrots, broccoli, like raw vegetables and baguette. And it is just so good. And it's a gathering dish. Like people want to stand around the table to eat it. So it immediately gathers people. And it's perfection.
Thank you so much, Bri. Is there anything else you want to add as we wrap up before the holidays and people have cooking on the mind?
I would say that you've got this. Lean into something that you feel comfortable with. You do not have to be a showstopper with your dish. You yourself are already the showstopper.
Still ahead, a wonderful conversation for parents with young kids. Amy Palanjian is the founder of Yummy Toddler Food, one of my personal favorite places to get simple, quick, nutritious recipes for my family. She acknowledges just how hard it can feel to cook when you have little kids, and she's sharing some great advice for how to make it all doable. We also talk about sudden changes to kids' appetites and food preferences, as well as what to do about the relative this holiday season who might comment on what your child eats. She also shares an easy, festive recipe for kids during the holidays, and added bonus, it makes eating their greens so much more fun. That and more coming up. But first, a quick break for our sponsors. The Newsworthy is brought to you by Quince. Quince is about to become your go-to spot for all types of gifts that offer a little luxury at an affordable price. From Mongolian cashmere sweaters starting at just $50 to Italian leather handbags, European linen sheet sets, luggage sets, and so much more. And here's the best part. All Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, Quince is able to pass the savings on to us. And that's true for some of my favorite items I already have from Quince, like my organic cotton knit blazer. It's super comfortable yet sophisticated. I can throw it on over my washable silk tank from Quince, or another top with jeans and heels and feel like my best self. I also love that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And of course, premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. So gift luxury this holiday season without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/newsworthy for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/newsworthy to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/newsworthy. This episode is also brought to you by Trade Coffee. Want to give the gift your family or friend will be talking about all year long? A Trade subscription is not just coffee. It is an experience that keeps on giving. Every month, your gift recipient will get a new freshly roasted coffee perfectly matched to their taste from one of the top small batch roasters in the U.S. I've enjoyed coffee from Sterling Coffee Roasters, Bird Rock Coffee Roasters, Dune Coffee Roasters, and more. It's like getting your loved one a tour of the country's best coffee shops without leaving home. I can tell you from my experience that it is such a fun process to receive the coffee in the mail each month, and the coffee itself is super fresh and high quality. I personally love trying all different kinds. So are you ready to cross that last gift off your list? Trade is offering their best savings of the year on gift subscriptions right now. So head to drinktrade.com/newsworthy to send a personalized coffee subscription in minutes. Again, go to drinktrade.com/newsworthy while Trade is offering their best savings of the year on gift subscriptions. Okay, now to my conversation with Amy Palanjian, founder of Yummy Toddler Food. Amy Palanjian, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to be here.
How do you think about cooking overall, especially for families with kids?
One of my main goals is to make it feel possible and to also make sure that throughout, whenever I'm talking about a recipe or sharing a video, that I am acknowledging the reality because it is so much harder to cook when you have little kids than to simply cook in general. And like cooking in general is very hard. So when you're sort of factoring everything else into it, I just think that parents need to know that they're like both not alone and that what they're feeling is appropriate and normal.
I know you have a take that I agree with, that it's like sometimes I'm the parent that just pulls out the frozen chicken nuggets and sometimes I'm making food from scratch. So can you share more about your efforts to normalize that and what that looks like in reality?
I think we need to just accept that there are times when we have to go with the thing that is easier because that is the key to getting our families fed and also not winding up resentful and angry and just like hating life. I think it makes a lot of sense to give yourself all of the options and then to use the ones that work best on whatever given day that it is. Like I almost always have frozen chicken tenders and frozen chicken nuggets in my freezer. And I also make a lot of those same foods from scratch, just depending on the day. And it doesn't mean that on the days that I use frozen foods that I'm failing or doing anything wrong. It just means that I'm meeting myself where I actually am, which is like one very small way that you can acknowledge the reality of your life in a way that is not judgmental and that sort of gives yourself a lot of grace.
And this is coming from someone who actually creates these recipes, and you still sometimes go to the freezer.
Exactly. Like this is my full-time job. I literally think about food and cooking and developing recipes all day long and like sometimes in the middle of the night. And like I have 3 kids and I'm also feeding myself. And sometimes there's just no bandwidth left.
What's the biggest misconception you hear from people about their own ability to cook?
There is this perception that you have to sort of do it all one way or like nothing counts. That's not a thing that actually exists. Like nobody cooks every single thing. And also it's setting yourself up sort of to fail before you even start because you're just judging yourself so harshly. And I think that there are ways that even if you don't feel like you're a comfortable or even confident cook, you can still assemble meals that are nutritious and have a variety of textures and flavors over the course of a week that are going to, feed your family appropriately and that are going to just like do the thing that you're really trying to do, which is to keep everyone fed and happy and nourished. A lot of the times I think that it's less about the actual cooking and more about the baggage that we're bringing to the kitchen.
Is there, though, when it actually comes to the cooking or baking part, that you do find people make a certain mistake in the kitchen?
So the most common mistake that I see is with baking, and it is with using whichever flour you feel like using. And I think that there's like this idea that you can just sort of wing it. And you can do that with a lot of cooking recipes. But when it comes to baking, like you really do need to follow the recipe if you want it to turn out as intended. I had someone comment today that was like, I followed this recipe exactly, except I used almond flour and I was like, that's not the same. And if you ever you want to substitute something, I would recommend that you just ask the recipe creator ahead of time because that will ensure that you're not wasting ingredients or your time. Just comment on the recipe and, anyone who is doing this full time regularly responds to comments. So you should get an answer pretty quickly.
Now that Thanksgiving is over, and we're starting to think about the holidays in December, what are you recommending for families, whether, you're bringing one dish to a potluck or you're hosting? What are some tips for the holiday cooking?
If thinking about making something from scratch gives you anxiety or it makes you feel like there is no possible way you're going to finish everything else, give yourself the option to take a shortcut. The other thing I love doing is just what is the one thing that you want to make sure that you have on this holiday? If you're going to someone else's house and you don't have this one dish that is something you grew up eating or just something you really love, bring that.
What's your advice for parents who are maybe worried that their kids won't be eating the holiday meal at Aunt Whoever's house?
This is such a contentious topic. And the thing that I like to remind people is that like as adults, we have had our whole lifetimes to get used to certain food traditions and to get used to seeing foods only once or twice a year. And our kids, if they're 2 years old, this is literally the second time that they have been in this situation. And the first time they may not have been eating food. And so to have the expectation that they're going to want to try all of these unfamiliar foods in an unfamiliar context on a day that they probably are on a very different schedule is not an accurate representation of like what's probably going to happen. So I would really like just encourage parents to accept that your kid may or may not eat much. And that is not an indication that you have done anything wrong. It is not an indication that your child has done anything wrong. And whichever relative has feelings about it will get over it. And so what I like to say is like if someone makes a comment about what a child is, like one of my kids is eating, I'll just say, it's totally fine. And then I will change the subject. Or I will say, they're just really not that hungry right now, but could we take some leftovers home with us?
What's your advice for kids eating meals in general? If someone's struggling with that, what are a couple of top tips?
The thing about little kids in particular is that their hunger patterns really can vary from like month to month or even year to year. And we come to expect that they're going to eat a certain way. And then suddenly they change. And we often default to calling them picky eaters when that's not actually often what's happening. They're just not as hungry as they used to be, which means that we need to just sort of adjust how we're serving meals, when we're serving them, space them out a little bit more, and give them the opportunity to show us how hungry they are and then trust them.
What pressures do you see get put on parents via social media when it comes to feeding children?
I think the biggest one is that a lot of the content is taken out of context. So you never see what actually happens. I mean, this is true even with my content because I'm not like filming my children actually eating the food. I'm just showing what the food is. So I think there is this expectation that if you see a plate of food that has a variety of things on it, there are kids out there who are just like pounding that plate and are eating everything on it. And like, that is the goal that you should aspire to. And really, I think what we need to remember is that all of these recipe ideas are just ideas and they may work for us and they may not. And that doesn't mean that anything's wrong.
To wrap up, I'd love for you to share one favorite easy thing to make or bake around the holidays.
So for the past couple of years, I've been making what we call Christmas pancakes. You can also call them Grinch pancakes. So they're green. They're like bright green. You take like the wet ingredients of a basic pancake batter. It's sweetened with a little bit of banana so that there's some natural sweetness in there. And then you put a bunch of spinach in it and blend it up. And so it turns bright green. You can make them in a pan. You can put them on a sheet pan and make like little strawberry Santa hats. It's very fun. And this is like one of those things that has become a tradition in our family. And so we get to this time of the year and then the kids start asking for it.
One final thought or advice for busy parents about how they cook, like kind of last takeaway, if you will.
One thing that we don't consider enough is whether or not we're feeding ourselves. And this is a very busy time of the year. And I think a lot of us have the tendency to sort of run around and forget that we also deserve to have a lunch that we like or to eat breakfast, not standing up or from the crumbs left on our kids' plates. So I know that my brand is about feeding the kids, but it also, I hope, is a reminder to make sure that you're feeding yourself.
Well, thank you to both of our guests today. If you enjoyed these conversations and their philosophies about cooking, definitely go check out their cookbooks and follow them on social media. You can go to yummytoddlerfood.com or follow along at Yummy Toddler Food on Instagram. Amy's latest book, Dinnertime SOS, is a must-have. And you'll also want to grab Bri McKoy's display-worthy cookbook, The Cook's Book. And you can follow her on Instagram at Bri McKoy. That's BRIMCKOY. We have links to all of it, including the specific recipes that both of our guests shared, in today's episode notes on our website, thenewsworthy.com. Thank you for listening today. Don't forget to share this episode with a friend or family member who might love it as well. And join us again during the week when we provide 10-minute daily news roundups to keep you in the know. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We'll be back on Monday with the news of the day. Until then, have a great weekend.